Wildfire seasons have been making headlines for the last few years as they set new records for length and intensity. Today, we are speaking with a leader and engineer who shares how fire suppressant and fire retardant technology have evolved to meet these growing challenges, along with the story of his own journey within the fire safety industry. That's on this episode of Solutions That Save, a fire safety podcast from Perimeter Solutions. Hello, I'm your host, Dan Green. Welcome to Solutions That Save, a fire safety podcast from Perimeter Solutions, helping save lives, property, natural resources, and critical infrastructure around the world. Today, I sit down with the CEO of Perimeter Solutions, Edward Goldberg. Eddie brings more than 18 years of executive leadership experience and a background as a chemical engineer to his position. We discuss the ways that his thinking evolved over the course of his career, and the ways in which the field of fire safety has evolved since the earliest days of airborne firefighting. Eddie starts us off.
You know, the one thing about becoming an engineer and going through engineering school is what it really teaches you is how to think about problems and how to look at complex things in a simpler way. It also helped me in the fact that, not only could I understand the chemistry, but also the way things work in real life. And it gives me the ability to talk to a wide range of people, kind of in the terms that they can understand to help synthesize better products and better results for our customers.
You're a chemical engineer who has risen to lead a global organization that is dedicated to high-quality firefighting products. So why fire safety, and what drew you into this industry?
About 20 years ago in 2001, I was just finishing up kind of a big project for the company and looking for the next thing to do. And it just so happened that the leadership of the fire safety business in Astaris at the time was coming available. And I was lucky enough to get put in that position. And the fire industry, at the time, it was just a job, but it's one of those industries that just gets in your blood and becomes a total passion, which it is for me, and kind of the rest of the organization the same way.
As an individual, it's easy to grasp the dangers that uncontrollable fire present. By watching the news, people understand how wildfires are becoming bigger threats to communities, businesses, and large regions of the country. But can you talk about what is contributing to the increased number and intensity of wildfires in recent years?
This is a problem that has been 100 years in the making. And the Forest Service over the last 100 years did a great job in completing their mission, which was to put every fire out. And what's happened over that 100 years is the forests have become unnaturally dense because fire is actually part of the ecosystem. It's part of the landscape. And naturally, forests will burn periodically to thin themselves out, to clear the underbrush, et cetera, so that when the fires do burn, they don't burn so severely. By letting fires burn for many, many decades, the forests have become very dense. So when fires do burn, they burn very hot and very fast, conditions that really have never been seen before. In fact, if you look at the statistics, the number of fires that we see every year in the U.S. has actually gone down. The country, the agencies, the communities have done a great job in educating the public about how to prevent some fires. So the number of fires is actually going down. What's really happening, though, is when those fires do burn, they're very intense, they're very fast, they burn very hot. You can see the consequences of burning right through communities. The other issue that we seem to have, which will be a future ongoing issue, is that over 65% of the new homes being built in the West are being built in the wildland-urban interface. So while the agencies that fight fire would like to be able to let more fires burn to clear out that underbrush and do what nature naturally does, they can't really do that most of the time because houses are in the way, they're in the forest, and people and property are at risk. So most fires have to be fought, which just continues the problem going into the future.
But Eddie, before we get into the history of fire retardant technology, I want to just discuss some of the terminology around wildfire safety. So, in news clips, we see firefighters at work laying down chemicals to suppress or extinguish fires. Can you explain the difference between what's happening in those videos and how long term fire retardant is used?
Sure, there's a number of different tools that firefighters use to fight wildfires. And there's two different classes of chemicals. There are suppressants and retardants. And the difference is a retardant actually reacts chemically with the fuel to make it non-flammable. And it works even when it's dry. So it's put on the ground and the water evaporates, but the chemical is still there and is completely effective until it's washed away by a heavy rain. A suppressant chemical like water or a foam or a gel is used actually to suppress the fire. So you see it being put directly on the fire. But all that is a way to make the water itself more effective. And once the water evaporates, there's no longer any effectiveness there. So what you see when you see the airplanes or helicopters laying down the retardant, the red stuff, is they're actually putting it out ahead of the fire, creating a chemical fire break so that the fire will actually burn up to the retardant line and stop or slow down. What that does is it gives the firefighters on the ground more time to get there and fight the fire on the ground. It creates safe areas that are non-flammable where the firefighters can work from. And it also helps manage or steer the fire away from communities or property or people's lives. It's really important to know that when you see white stuff coming out of an airplane or a helicopter, that is really just water or some water enhancer, effective, period. And it is really not safe to enter the ground where that water or water enhancer is being dropped, because once that water evaporates, there's no effectiveness there. The retardant gives you a much longer term effectiveness and can protect things like ingress and egress roads. It can allow firefighters to get into areas that they wouldn't normally be able to get into. And more we see homeowners using chemicals to be able to protect their own house or have services that do that for them. And there's two very important things to remember here. One is, no matter what you're using, it doesn't make it safe to stay in your house. If you're using a retardant treatment around your vegetation, or you're using foam or gel on your house, none of that makes it okay to stay in your house in the face of an oncoming fire. So we urge everybody always to follow the directions from their local communities and follow evacuation orders. Do not think that just because you're using some chemical to treat around or on your house that you can stay there and be safe. That is not the case. The other thing that you should keep in mind is some services use gel to either treat on a house or around a house. Gel is just a water thickener. It keeps the water where it's supposed to be instead of having it run off. But in fire conditions, it may only last 20 minutes or 40 minutes or maybe an hour. So those products can't be applied until right before a fire gets there, or they have absolutely no effectiveness whatsoever. The best course, if you're a homeowner wanting to protect your property, is to use a long-term retardant that can be used early in the season or hours or days ahead of a fire to keep that fire further away from your house. But again, remember, I just want to stress that it doesn't make it safe to stay there. You should always evacuate if told to do so.
Now, let's get into the history of fire retardant technology. So, when did firefighters start using it?
So aerial firefighting actually started back in the 1940s with airplanes that were fitted with tanks and just were dropping water. In 1954, we saw the first air tanker that actually had installed tanks dropping chemicals. And then in the 1960s, we saw the first helicopter with a helicopter bucket, and then the first helicopter with a fixed tank. And originally, they were just dropping water. But as they came to realize, dropping water from an airplane or a helicopter in fire conditions is a pretty ineffective thing to do. By the time the water leaves the airplane, it either drifts or evaporates, and almost none of it actually hits the ground. So they started to see the need for additives, something to make the water drop more effectively, hit the ground more accurately, And then eventually the need for chemicals to actually either prolong the use of the water or use a retardant chemical which has more effectiveness than just water.
Okay, Eddie. So, why did fire retardant technology need to evolve?
So a lot of things have changed over the last 40 years or so. Certainly the need to improve effectiveness, the need to improve environmental friendliness is always something on everybody's mind. And we've worked hard with the agencies to improve our products to become more effective and much more environmentally friendly. The early retardants were really just either gum thickened water or used chemicals. You may have heard the term in the past, borate bombers. They used sodium borate in order to be that first long-term retardant. Those chemicals were found to be pretty bad for the environment. Were discontinued pretty quickly. And I'd say around the early 1960s is when we saw really the first generation of what I would call today's fire retardants, using basic mixtures of ammonium phosphates and ammonium sulfates. And of course, over time, we have improved a lot of things. Today's retardants are safer and more effective than ever before. The use rate of the chemicals is significantly lower, meaning you can use less chemical to get the same effectiveness. We've added materials to make them drop more effectively. So today's products have a recovery rate of 90+%, meaning 90% of what leaves the airplane actually hits the target. And the corrosion inhibitors and the color are safer and more effective than we've ever seen before. So the technology and the innovation in this industry over the last 30 or 40 years has been quite significant. And today's products are safer, more effective, and more environmentally friendly than anything we've ever seen before. Over the course of the last 40 years, the delivery systems or the aircraft that have been dropping fire retardant have evolved from the early biplanes of the 1940s all the way to today's modern jet airplanes, including a number of DC-10s and 747s. And as you can guess, what it takes to be effective being dropped out of a 747 is quite different than out of a biplane or an old Korean War vintage P2 or P3. So we've had to improve a number of the aspects of the retardant to become effective with these more modern, faster, larger airplanes. Better thickening systems, better colorant packages, better corrosion inhibitors, all to be able to keep up with the new technology in aircraft.
When you look back at how it was, back in the day, I mean, how successful were they in those early days?
So, for the day, they were pretty successful. And, the basic chemistry of fire retardancy really hasn't changed that much over the last 40 years. So it's the same basic active ingredients that we were using. The difference is that we have found ways to make that chemical more effective. So as an example, the use rate or the amount of active ingredient it takes today in a gallon of fire retardant is less than half of what it was back in the 1960s. So we're seeing twice the effectiveness for the same type of chemistry. We've also found over time that ingredients that were used for thickening, ingredients that were used for corrosion inhibition, really turned out to have some environmental issues that we were able to correct by finding new, safer ingredients like that we use today. I can almost say that what's used in fire retardant today is either food grade or cosmetic grade materials that are very safe. They're safe for aquatic life, they're safe for animals, they're safe for people. And the color today is very advanced. The color is needed for the pilots to be able to see the retardant on the ground so that they can make sure that they get a continuous fire line as they're dropping. And today's colorants are fluorescent, very bright, highly visible, but at the same time, they disappear when exposed for sunlight for a couple of weeks. So you wouldn't know that there was retardant on the ground particularly when it's dropped on somebody's house and it'll either disappear or easily be washed off, which you see occasionally with, whenever you're dropping something out of an airplane. So while the basic chemistry of the active ingredient has evolved a little bit, the technology around what we call the additive package or the performance ingredients has evolved significantly. There's a lot of chemicals out there that have some fire retardant mechanism. And one of the things that we'll talk about in the future podcast is some of those different chemicals and their effectiveness and some of the issues and positives around the different chemicals. We've been using phosphate chemistry for many, many years. It is by far the most effective, the safest, the most environmentally friendly chemistry out there for fire retardancy. And we continue to evolve. We continue to innovate. We work very hard to make our products every day safer and more effective and more environmentally friendly. And I think also in a future podcast, we'll talk more about innovation, not only what we've done over the last 20 years, but also what's coming up.
Want to learn more about solutions that save lives, property, natural resources, and critical infrastructure around the world? Visit us at perimetersolutions.com. That's perimeter-solutions.com. See how our products impact critically important issues of life. Issues where there often is no room for error, and the job doesn't offer second chances. Please join us again for another episode of Solutions That Save, a fire safety podcast from Perimeter Solutions.